Welcome to this Killick Explains video, and it won't surprise regular viewers to know that I have the results of another poll up my sleeve. This time the subject was, how much do you think you know about financial markets and how experienced would you consider yourself to be? So let's run through those poll results first of all. The first category was, I am a novice, and that was 37% of the people who responded. Next up, and the winning category, I consider myself fairly experienced, and that was 46%, so nearly half of the poll respondents. And then I offered very experienced, and that accounted for just 10%, roughly speaking. And finally, I offered people the chance to say I'm a professional, and that was 7%. So most people put themselves into either novice or fairly experienced categories. Now, why does this matter? Well, for several reasons actually. First of all, overconfidence is one of the biggest blocks to successful investing, so I'm glad to see that the bulk of people who responded didn't put themselves into a kind of expert or pro category, but went with novice or fairly experienced. Because if you try and bluff your way in financial markets, and I'll come back to that in a moment, you are going to open yourselves up to the snake oil sales folk who will then sell you a complex solution which perhaps doesn't do what you need it to. So honesty is an important policy. Now, as I mentioned, if you're talking to, say, a financial advisor, it's their job to weigh up how much you know. But a good starting point is you being able to accurately judge what you know, and therefore you know what you don't know, as it were. Now, just to give you the full list, before you take so much as 1 ounce of advice, especially paid from anyone when it comes to your money, there are certain things that should be weighed up first. The personal considerations, as I call them, can be grouped as follows. There is your experience, and that was the point of my poll, but also there is your knowledge levels, and that can be down to whether you've ever sat any professional exams, how long you've been investing for, what you do and don't know about, whether you've stuck to a certain part of the markets, for example. There's your interest. Do you really want to be involved day to day in managing your money, or are you happy, even with some knowledge and experience, to hand it over to somebody else? Time is a factor here too. Some people who are quite capable of doing their own investment management and financial planning simply are too busy to do so. Then there are your objectives. What are you trying to achieve and by when? And that's very personal to you. There's no generalization that will work for most people there. And finally, risk attitude. You could be the most experienced, most knowledgeable person in the market, and if your risk tolerance is low, that will influence how you invest and over what time horizon potentially. So those are all the personal questions that anyone talking to you ought to try and discover the answers to. But then there are some financial ones too. So a good advisor will try and tease out, and this can seem annoying, it can seem intrusive, but we'll try and tease out information about your income and expenditure and your assets and liabilities, what you own and what you owe to other people. Now, why is that important? It's, well, a number of reasons actually, but finding out about your income gives somebody a picture on risk. So if I gave you 3 sources of income and asked you to rank them in terms of risk, you'd come up with different rankings. A final salary pension income, for example, is arguably a very safe form of income. Salary from an employer is fairly safe, but firms do go bust sometimes. And then you move into the realm of, dividend income and or perhaps rental income from properties. These are arguably riskier sources of income because dividends can be cut or suspended and tenants may suddenly stop paying or move out. So it's important to understand your personal risk when it comes to your income, for example. As for your assets, what you own, you might think, why does anyone need to know that in order to advise me? Well, the truth is that that gives a picture on your financial security and your capacity to absorb losses, as it's known. And that's all vital information when it comes to setting you up correctly. Now, what do I mean by setting you up correctly? Well, a good advisor will attempt to make sure, having understood the full picture about your personal factors, if you like, and your financial position, they'll then try and build out the right rainy day fund for emergencies, plan for those foreseeable calls on capital in the medium term, where you may need to be fairly liquid, but not today necessarily, and then try and set up a lifetime saving strategy that will maximise your chances of beating inflation by a decent margin over time. So it's important from a sort of 3 buckets perspective. And it's also important from another angle, which is the more information somebody has about you, the more tax efficient they can hopefully make sure your strategy ends up being. They can also identify gaps and hidden risks. In other words, those unknown unknowns, as Dick Cheney once famously put it. Knowing what you don't know is as important as knowing what you do. And finally, it's just going to result in hopefully better, more constructive, more tailored advice. So glad to see that people responding to my poll were prepared to be honest. That's really important. But also, if you ever do approach somebody to act as an investment manager or a wealth planner on your behalf, make sure they are thoroughly kicking the tires on understanding both you, your financial situation, and your goals. Because without all that information, without a considered approach, the risks of getting it wrong rise considerably. To find out more, by the way, for those people who put themselves in the novice category, to find out more about financial markets in general, please do go to my comprehensive library of videos, killick.com/learn. You could start with the General Principles tab if you like. And if you're new to both investing and also financial planning, you could try my educational guides, and those are available editor@killick.com. There are 6 of them, and I'll happily ping any of them over to you.